year full of stories. 366 days of stories and rhymes. And today is May the 3rd. And so let's go to May the 3rd and see what it says. It says, Kate and Mr. Duck. One evening, Ma and Pa Perkins were going out for a little while, and Mrs. Duck had come to look after Kate Kitten. Mama and Papa kissed Katy goodbye. "I don't want you to go," said Katy. "We won't be long," said Mama. "Be good," said Papa. "We'll have some fun," said Mrs. Duck. As Mama and Papa closed the door, Katy began to cry. "I can do magic tricks," said Mrs. Duck, pulling 6 silk handkerchiefs from under her wing. "I don't like magic tricks," says Katy, but secretly she did. Next, Mrs. Duck balanced some bouncing balls on her beak. Katy stopped crying. "Can I try?" she asked. Katy tried to balance a ball on her nose, but it wobbled off. When they had played for a while, Mrs. Duck said, "It's bedtime, Katy." "Can't we play a little longer?" said Katy. "We can play in the bath," said Mrs. Duck. So they went to the bathroom, and Mrs. Duck turned on the taps. Swish went the water. "Here's the bubble stuff," said Katy. Mrs. Duck squirted in lots and lots. There were bubbles everywhere. And then Katy climbed into the bath, and Mrs. Duck jumped in after her. Splash! And paddled up and down in the sudsy foams, making Katy laugh. The two were having such a good time that they didn't hear Mama and Papa Perkins come home. Mama popped her head into the bathroom door. "What's all the noise?" she said with a smile. Some bubbles floated out through the door on the landing. "And what's all the mess?" said Papa. Later, when Mrs. Duck was gone and Katy was tucked into bed, Mama and Papa came in to say good night. "Will Mrs. Duck be coming again?" asked Katy. "Next time we go out," said Mama. "If you want her to," said Papa. "Yes," said Katy, "I do." So she had fun with the babysitter. And this is just a story, which is why she's in the bath with the little girl. That shouldn't ever happen. So, but Mama loves you, baby, and Mama misses you, and Mama can't wait to see you, and I'm just gonna read you another storybook. Hall Monitor. It's a scholastic book, so it should be okay. Ahoy there, kids! Ready to sing the SpongeBob Squarepants theme song? I can hear you. Oh, who lives in a pineapple under the sea? SpongeBob Squarepants, absorbed in yellow and porous is he. SpongeBob Squarepants, if nautical nonsense be something you wish. SpongeBob Squarepants, then drop on the deck and fluff like a fish. SpongeBob Squarepants, SpongeBob Squarepants, SpongeBob Squarepants. SpongeBob SquarePants, ah ha ha ha, ah ha ha ha. Hall Monitor. Let's see. Mrs. Puff sighed deeply. "All right, I guess I have no choice," she gulped. "The Hall Monitor this week is SpongeBob." "Yoo-hoo!" yelled SpongeBob. And so the victory dance began. SpongeBob raced around the room, bouncing off the walls and zigzagging around all the desks. And when he shouted, Hall Monitor, I am the Hall Monitor," finally SpongeBob calmed down, stood next to Mrs. Puff in the front of the class, and saluted. "Hall Monitor SpongeBob reporting for duty, ma'am," he said in a drill sergeant voice. Mrs. Puff began, "Now, but SpongeBob continued, I'm ready to assume my position in the hall." "But yes," Mrs. Puff said, "I will protect all you who are weak in the hall, SpongeBob shouted. And the rules will be enforced in the hall. Okay, said an annoyed Mrs. Puff. Just take the cap and the belt. I can't accept that yet, ma'am, SpongeBob told her. First, I have to make my speech. Oh my. Hall monitor. Chapter 1. There's no one in Bikini Bottom quite like SpongeBob Squarepants, who has not at work, like SpongeBob Squarepants, when he's not at work flipping Krabby Patties or on an adventure with his friend Patrick, SpongeBob can be found at Mrs. Puff's boarding school. Mrs. Puff's boarding school is where students learn the rules of the road. SpongeBob has taken Mrs. Puff's class 47 times. 47 times, and he's still not giving up, baby. He knows the answer to every question in the classroom, but when it's time for the driving portion of the exam, SpongeBob always panics behind the wheel and ends up failing. When SpongeBob is on the road, it's best to steer clear or run for cover. One day at school, things seemed normal. SpongeBob sat in the back of the class, taking precious notes when all of the other students slept. Their snoring was almost louder than Mrs. Puff's lecture. Everyone woke up. Mrs. Puff called, "It's time to pick this week's hall monitor." SpongeBob sat upright in his seat. He moved his desk out into the center aisle to make sure Mrs. Puff could see him. He moved his desk into the center aisle, baby. to choose as hall monitor. Wait. So to make sure Mrs. Puff could see him, being chosen as hall monitor was an honor. SpongeBob wanted more than anything. With his eyes wide and hopeful, he wished hard for his name to be called. Mrs. Puff looked down at the list attached to her clipboard and said, "Let's see here. This week's hall monitor will be, Bert." "No, he's done it already, Tina." "He's done it already." "Tina?" No, she said to herself. Then Mrs. Puff gasped in horror. At the bottom of the list was the name she feared the most, SpongeBob SquarePants. "It's Jimmy. Jimmy's the hall monitor," Mrs. Puff explained. Jimmy, a green fish wearing shorts and a t-shirt, shook his head and said, "Mrs. Puff, I've already done it." "Oh," Mrs. Puff replied quickly, scanning the list again. "Bill?" "No way," Mrs. Puff answered Bill, a plump gray fish sitting in the back. Mrs. Puff wasted no time. "Tina, you're the hall monitor," she said. "Hey, I've done it 3 times already," Tina declared, her fins on her hips. Beth," Mrs. Puff said. "Yeah, Beth. She graduated," Jimmy told her. But this time SpongeBob has eagerly inched his desk to the aisle. He could hardly contain his excitement. He knew what was coming. But Mrs. Puff was still trying to avoid calling the name of a certain rectangular student. "Harry, Very, Sheldon," she called out in desperation. But it was no use. Mrs. Puff sighed deeply. "All right, I guess I have no choice." She gulped. The hall monitor of the week is SpongeBob. "Yoo-hoo!" yelled SpongeBob, as so the victory dance began. SpongeBob raced around the classroom, bouncing off the walls and zigzagging around the desks. All the while he shouted, "Hall monitor! Hall monitor! I'm the hall monitor!" Finally SpongeBob calmed down, stood next to Mrs. Puff in front of the class, and saluted. "Hall monitor, SpongeBob, reporting for duty, ma'am," he said in a drill sergeant voice. Mrs. Puff began, "Now, but SpongeBob continued, "I'm ready to assume my position in the hall." "Yes, but," Mrs. Puff said, "I will protect all who are weak in the hall." SpongeBob shouted, All rules will be enforced in the hall. Okay, said the annoyed Mrs. Puff. Just take the cap and belt. I can't accept that yet, ma'am, SpongeBob told her. First I have to make my speech. Mrs. Puff sighed. You can't make this easy, can you? There they are. Classmates, SpongeBob began, who am I to deserve such a great honor? Why, I'd be nothing without Mrs. Puff. Oh, give me a break, Mrs. Puff muttered under her breath. And to my public, SpongeBob continued, all I can say is, well, frankly, I'm touched. He wiped a tear away. I want you to know that I represent you out there in the hall. I will carry out my duties, SpongeBob promised as he rambled on. Crime and punishment, punishment and crime in the hall. The other students sighed and groaned, but SpongeBob wasn't done. That reminds me of an extremely long speech written by the greatest hall monitor of all time. He took a dramatic pose. Friends, students, juveniles, delinquents, lend me your ears. The students covered their ears. 3 hours later, SpongeBob was getting ready to wrap up his speech. Finally, he said, in conclusion, and without a moment to spare, I will put on this uniform and assume my duties as hall monitor. SpongeBob had expected a round of applause, but this time everyone had fallen asleep, including Mrs. Puff. Luckily, the bell rang. Zzz. Oh, Mrs. Puff said as she stood up. All the students woke up with a jolt and rushed out of the classroom. They practically ran over SpongeBob on their way out. SpongeBob sighed. I overdid the speech again, didn't I? He asked his teacher. I'm afraid so, Mrs. Puff told him. Tartar sauce, explained SpongeBob. I guess I won't be needing these. He handed the hall monitor cap and belt back to the teacher. I hardly knew ya, he added, looking sadly at the uniform. SpongeBob was gripping the uniform so tightly that Mrs. Puff had to pry it from his hands. SpongeBob's disappointment showed in his face, as well as in his slightly deflated head. Mrs. Puff couldn't believe it, but she actually felt sorry for SpongeBob. Each time he'd been elected hall monitor, he hadn't made it out of the door. SpongeBob? Yes, Mrs. Puff, replied SpongeBob. I can at least let you wear the uniform until tomorrow, she offered. Woo-hoo! Yelled SpongeBob. His head was intensely back to its full size. Thanks, Mrs. Puff. SpongeBob sang to himself as he put on his hall monitor uniform. Beep bop dee 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 doo dee doo doo doo. Hall beep bop doo doo monitor roo too too. Mrs. Puff sighed and shook her head as SpongeBob bounced out of the classroom door. Chapter 2. Walking proudly in his hall monitor uniform, SpongeBob strode down the street. He held his head up high, honored to be the hall monitor, even if it was only for the rest of the day. Suddenly, he stopped dead in his tracks. A broken traffic light, he cried. Who's to say my monitoring duties should end just because the bell rang? He wondered. Then he straightened his cap. I can be helpful anywhere. Yes, this looks like a job for the hall monitor. SpongeBob pulled out the whistle. All right, he said as he signaled. Hey, big boat, you go that way, and the turbo boat can go this way, and this one that way, and this one left, and this one right, and this one here, and over there. SpongeBob not only made signals with his arms, but with his legs and rear end as well. His arms went left and the cars went right. His legs were kicked out and the car swerved around. No driver could follow. They weren't sure if he was dancing or directing traffic. "Ha! This is a piece of crusty crab cake," SpongeBob said confidently. And just then 2 boats swiped each side of SpongeBob, sending him spinning. "Woo!" he yelled. Gaining his balance, SpongeBob looked up to see the huge boat coming right towards him. With all of his might, SpongeBob stretched his legs as far as he could, just in the nick of time. "Yikes!" SpongeBob yelled, as the big boat zoomed right between his legs. "Barnacle brain!" yelled the driver. SpongeBob couldn't really hear him over the traffic noise. "You're welcome," he called with a friendly wave. Screech! Slam! Crash! That friendly wave caused the biggest frenzy yet. A 15-car pileup. Pedestrians nearly became speed bumps. Horns were blaring and tempers were flaring. "Well, my work here is done," he said. Then he smiled. "What would this town do without me?" SpongeBob was so pleased with his first hall monitor task that he had no idea that he had caused more accidents than he had prevented. But he didn't notice at all of the angry drivers, wrecked cars, and injured pedestrians around him. "On patrol, I'm on patrol," he sang to himself as he left the traffic catastrophe. Chapter 3. SpongeBob was walking home when he heard a noise. "Who's there?" SpongeBob called, and SpongeBob said and froze. He looked at the looming shadow of the wall. "It's a bird. It's a plane. It's hall monitor." He finished with a laugh. SpongeBob walked a few more feet before another bold opportunity presented itself. A low, open window. "Uh-oh," he said, and he took a peek inside the house. A couple of fish were enjoying a meal together. "More seaweed, Medley dear?" the female fish asked her husband. "Oh, yes," the husband replied. "You know it's my favorite." SpongeBob was appalled. The fools! This open window is so unsafe. They've left themselves susceptible to danger. Of course, SpongeBob couldn't just warn them of this danger. "I must show them the error of their ways by example," he declared. Oh my. SpongeBob looked around and grabbed a paper bag out of the nearby garbage can. He put it on over his head, pinching 2 holes out for the eyes, and then he leaped into the window and screamed, "Ooh, I'm the open window maniac." "Ah!" screamed the husband and the wife as they ran for their lives. "I hope you learned a valuable lesson," SpongeBob called after them. He took a deep breath. Boy, this hero stuff is hard work, but someone has to do it. SpongeBob continued patrolling the streets of Bikini Bottom. He was so pleased with himself that he started to imagine his future. "With all I've done already, they should make me the permanent hall monitor. I can see it now. My picture in the Hall of Hall Monitor wannabe hall monitors will hear stories of my brave monitoring experiences, and I'll get the first ever hall monitor medal. I'll give a speech at the Society of Hall Monitors." Just then something caught on SpongeBob's foot, causing him to fly through the air. "Whoa!" he yelled. Once SpongeBob got to his feet, he shouted, "Vandals, Another crime. Before him on the ground was a blob of something pink. SpongeBob bent over and scooped up a dollop with his finger. Mmm, strawberry ice cream, he said, smelling it. I must act. It's my duty as hall monitor to protect and serve. I must find out who's behind this delicious dessert. Crime. He was looking around for any suspects when a dollop of some strawberry ice cream fell on the top of his head. Patrick, explained SpongeBob as he looked up and saw his best friend sitting on a wall. Patrick looked around and didn't see anyone. He continued licking his ice cream. Patrick, SpongeBob shouted again. Patrick's eyes widened in fear. My ice cream, it's alive, he said. Ah! He threw the ice cream up in the air. It went high. So Patrick thought the ice cream was talking to him because he's up high and he didn't look down. In the sky turned upside down and started its descent, landing right in SpongeBob's face. Down here, Patrick called SpongeBob, wiping his face. Patrick looked down and smiled. Oh, SpongeBob, it's you. Come down here, Patrick, SpongeBob ordered. Getting off the wall wasn't too easy for Patrick. He lost his balance and landed right on top of SpongeBob, flattening him like a pancake. SpongeBob, SpongeBob, where are you? Patrick called out. In a muffled voice, SpongeBob said, I'm down here. Patrick stood up and started at SpongeBob. You look funny, SpongeBob, he said with a giggle. That's hall monitor to you, SpongeBob corrected as he stood up and expanded back to his normal size. Oops, sorry, officer, replied Patrick. Sorry is not good enough, Patrick, SpongeBob told him. You've just committed a crime. I'm taking you in. What crime? Patrick asked nervously. Littering, SpongeBob declared. Ice cream is meant to go in your mouth, not on the street. Patrick burst into tears. Oh, I'm a bad person, he sobbed. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo. Just then the fish selling newspaper approached the pair. Extra, extra, Manic strikes Bikini Bottom. City paralyzed with fear. He cried and handed them a newspaper. Take it, friends. Arm yourselves with knowledge. SpongeBob began to read. Manic, Bikini Bottom, car wrecks, a break-in. Then he took a breath and said in the most horrific voice, who better to bring this Manic to justice than me? Hall monitor. Chapter 4. SpongeBob turned to Patrick, who was still upset about the ice cream incident. I can't handle this Manic case alone, SpongeBob explained. Patrick, are you ready to give up your life of crime? I want to be good, cried Patrick. Uh-huh, I thought so, SpongeBob said, proud of his best buddy. Now you just need a symbol of authority, he added, looking around. Oh my. Patrick picked up the ice cream cone from the ground and put it in his head. It fit perfectly. Exactly, said SpongeBob. It's your duty to catch the Manic and to bring him to justice. But how to proceed? He looked over at Patrick. Hey, deputy, you're an ex-criminal. What would you do? Patrick thought carefully. I know, I'd get an ice cream. Let's go, said SpongeBob. A little while later, SpongeBob and Patrick emerged from the ice cream parlor. They each had an ice cream cone and a 75 little taster spoon. Soon they both had licked their ice creams until they were all gone. Okay, now what? Said SpongeBob. Seconds, suggested Patrick. I'm ready, said SpongeBob, and they headed back inside. Thirds, Patrick suggested a few minutes later. Sure, replied SpongeBob. 7 ice creams later, SpongeBob finally said, Patrick, this isn't working. We're not getting any closer to catching the Manic. Yeah, agreed Patrick, but this ice cream sure is tasty. We've got to do something else, SpongeBob declared. Something with walkie-talkies. Yeah, declared Patrick. SpongeBob pulled out 2 walkie-talkies, handing one to Patrick. I think we'll have a better chance at catching the Manic if we split up. Ah, Patrick said, disappointed. SpongeBob put a hand on Patrick's shoulder. In his best hall monitor voice, he said, remember, it's for the good of the mission, son. After all, there was a Manic on the loose. Patrick sighed. Yeah, I guess so. Now duty calls, said SpongeBob. I'll go that way. Deputy, you go some other way. Roll 'em up. SpongeBob did the best impression of a siren as he laughed. Woo, 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 woo. The next thing Patrick knew, a police vehicle pulled up to him. Afternoon, son, one cop said to Patrick. Patrick smiled. Hello, brothers, he replied, signaling at his cone hat. The police officers exchanged puzzled looks with each other. They both wondered what they could possibly have in common with this overstuffed starfish. Yeah, Patrick replied. Okay, said the cop. Here we go. Horrible. Patrick screamed again. Take him away. The cop quickly took away the drawing. Both officers looked at Patrick and then at each other. Then one of the officers held the drawing up to Patrick again. Ah, Patrick shouted. The officer took away the drawing, and Patrick seemed to initially calm down. Then the officer showed it to him again. Ah, Patrick shouted. The officer took it away. Patrick was calm. The police officer gave each other a sly look and grin. Finally, the cop had enough entertainment for the day and put the wanted poster away. Stay indoors, son, and one cop warned Patrick, and the other cop added, and take that stupid cone off your head. Both officers smirked as they drove away. Chapter 5. Patrick was spooked. He immediately pulled out his walkie-talkie. SpongeBob, he called. It's in. SpongeBob, come in. Answer. SpongeBob here, Patrick report, said SpongeBob. I don't want to be a police officer anymore. I'm scared, Patrick cried. There's a Manic on the prowl. SpongeBob tried to calm Patrick down. Get a hold of yourself, deputy. Ba-boo-ha. Sobbed Patrick. I want to go home. Poor rookie, SpongeBob thought sadly to himself. Then, through his walkie-talkie, he told Patrick, all right, I'm on my way back. Hurry, SpongeBob, Patrick said. I think it's getting dark. And just like that, it was dark. Put on your siren, SpongeBob told Patrick. I'll be right there. Patrick shivered with fear, and he walked down the street in a scared voice. He whispered, wee woo, wee woo, wee woo. Patrick bent down and picked up something. It was a wanted poster for the Manic. When Patrick looked up from the poster, he saw something else. Something even scarier. Wee woo, wee woo, wee woo, he shouted. In the distance, Patrick saw the Manic standing under a streetlight. The Manic looked as scary and dangerous as his picture on the wanted poster. SpongeBob, Patrick cried into the walkie-talkie. I see him. The Manic. SpongeBob radioed back. Patrick responded. Where is he, Patrick? SpongeBob asked. Patrick looked up at the street sign at the intersection of Coach and Carl. He said, That's where I am, declared SpongeBob, getting frightened. He's right on top of me, but I just can't see him. It's too dark. What's he doing, Patrick? Patrick peered into the distance. He's just standing there. Manically. Okay. Patrick is scared. He has his cone on his head. He has his walkie-talkie. There's SpongeBob with his walkie-talkie. He reported, "Get out of there, SpongeBob." "Ah!" SpongeBob cried and began to running around looking for a place to hide. In the distance, Patrick heard a horrible cry. He grew even more afraid. That's his manic shriek. He's going to attack, he shouted into his walkie-talkie. "Patrick, help!" SpongeBob shouted as he ran in circles, growing more and more afraid. The manic action all crazy. "Run!" Patrick instructed. SpongeBob quickly darted behind the buildings. "No, wait, the manic's behind the building!" Patrick yelled. "Yikes!" yelled SpongeBob as he hightailed it behind a street sign. "The manic just ran behind a sign!" Patrick yelled. SpongeBob ran into the street. He literally picked up to hide underneath it. "Wait!" "Now he's under the streetlight," Patrick shrieked. "Ah!" screamed SpongeBob. "Run for yourself! Run for your life!" Patrick yelled. SpongeBob was sobbing as he spotted the perfect hiding place. "Ah!" he said and dove headfirst into a mailbox amongst the layers of letters. SpongeBob's breath and sigh of relief. Suddenly, SpongeBob heard Patrick's voice on the walkie-talkie. The walkie-talkie was buried beneath the letter, so the reception wasn't clear. "Say again, deputy?" SpongeBob radiated. "The manic's in the mailbox," Patrick reported. "Ew!" SpongeBob screamed. He punched holes in the side and the bottom of the mailbox with his arms and his legs. Now wearing the mailbox, SpongeBob began to run. But he couldn't see where he was going. He ran through buildings and homes, trying to get away from the dreaded manic. Wham! SpongeBob crashed into a fence. The mailbox split open on impact, and SpongeBob found himself surrounded by the planks of the fence he had just broken through. I can't see, he shrieked. But then SpongeBob opened his eyes and found that there was a piece of paper covering his face. If it was one of the wanted posters for the manic. "Huh, this guy's not half bad looking for a manic," SpongeBob thought aloud as he looked at it. There he goes. Suddenly, SpongeBob saw the resemblance. "Wait a minute, Patrick. I'm the manic." A line of police officers immediately appeared. "Well, take that as a confession," declared one officer. "But began SpongeBob. Just then Mrs. Puff showed up on the scene. She made her way to SpongeBob. "SpongeBob Squarepants, there you are. I turn my back on you for 1 minute and you destroy half the city. You should be ashamed of yourself." "You know this guy?" a cop asked Mrs. Puff. "Of course I do," replied Mrs. Puff. "I'm the one who gave him the uniform in the first place. He's my responsibility." All the police officers narrowed their eyes at Mrs. Puff. Mrs. Puff said, realizing that she had just taken the blame for SpongeBob and all the trouble that he caused. "This is going on your permanent record, SpongeBob," she called as the police carted her away. In class the next day, an embarrassed SpongeBob kept to himself. Everyone in Bikini Bottom had heard about his hall monitor fiasco, or his unintentionally being a part of it. As Mrs. Puff finished her lesson for the day, SpongeBob made sure to take precious notes. And in conclusion, students, Mrs. Puff said, red means stop, green means go, and SpongeBob. SpongeBob looked up at the TV monitor sitting on top of Mrs. Puff's desk. Yes, Mrs. Puff? I'd like to see you after class. 6 months from now, snapped Mrs. Puff from her jail cell. SpongeBob merely replied, yes, Mrs. Puff, and he knew that he had no chance of being hall monitor ever again. The end. Ahoy there, kids! Here is a sneak peek at chapter book 4, The World's Greatest Valentine, in the SpongeBob SquarePants series. It's a splashy tale. Hey, Valentines! Hey, Bikini Bottom, with the jury. Alright, so this is the next book, but we don't have this book. But, at least I don't think I have it. I don't know. I'll have to take a look maybe. But do you see what just happened? What happened? SpongeBob broke into someone's house. SpongeBob wanted to become hall monitor, and Mrs. Puff let him keep the outfit for the day, right? So Mrs. Puff was like, oh my gosh, I feel bad for SpongeBob. He never gets to go do his hall monitor duties because he spends his entire day talking in front of the class. Alright, some people do lectures all day once they get something that they want. So they'll talk and talk and talk. So he went out because she let him have the duty for the day, for one day. And he went out and he made a mess of the traffic, alright? And he broke into someone's house. And he tried to arrest his friend Patrick. And Patrick is impersonating being a cop. And SpongeBob's impersonating being a cop. And now they're cops and deputies, right? And they're getting all this ice cream. Patrick is getting scared because he doesn't realize that's his best friend right there. And so then there is SpongeBob, right? And he goes into the mailbox. And now he's running around and he's running into everything because he can't see. Because he got really scared that the manic is in the mailbox with him. Not realizing that he is the manic until he sees a wanted poster that's in front of his face. Right? So SpongeBob should be the one that gets in trouble. Take on responsibility for what he did because he was trying to help, but he wasn't being very helpful because he doesn't understand beyond the scope of his own view. And then what happens? Mrs. Puff shows up, takes responsibility for absolutely everything and anything that SpongeBob did, and then she winds up in jail. Now, this can happen in real life. This, like, if you don't want to break someone else's perception or hurt someone else's feelings, and you take on responsibility for something that someone else does, that person's going to be sitting in class, and the other person's going to be sitting in jail. Right? This really happens in real life because certain people feel the responsibility to not break someone else's worldview or point of view. Don't take responsibility for other people's actions and faults, baby. And don't feel so much like everything has to be within the worldview of just what it is. Like, I know it's hard to break someone else's perception on things, and I know it's easier just to take responsibility for everything, but just be careful what you take responsibility for. Alright, look, I love you immensely and I miss you so much, and you know, Mama just loves you. Mama just loves you and misses you. And you know, like Papa always used to say, Mama's his sun, Papa's Mama's moon. You're a rainbow baby and we will always love you. I'm glad I get to read you books, at least over the internet or for right now. I can't wait to see you and play with you and take you places and have you pick out what you want to do. Alright, Mama loves you. Mama loves you so much. But always remember, just like this book, a lot of these books are just like real life, and yet there's so many people who just don't understand that. But Mama loves you, baby. Mama will always love you. I love you so much.